Hello and welcome to Fight Network Boxing Weekly. Corey Erdman alongside Morgan Campbell here in the Fight Network studios and broadcasting on XM channel 167. Morgan, last time out we rang the bell.
We were going to ring the bell and I looked for the hammer. There's no bell.
There's no bell. I have a bell that I generously donated to the background over here.
What did they do to your bell, Corey?
They have screwed my bell into the wall. Now, when they took the bell away from me, they said, like, don't worry, the bell belongs to you. You're not just donating it to the channel or whatever. If for some reason you get fired, maybe this little dialogue here gets me fired. If some reason that happens, you get your bell back. I don't know that that's the case because it is screwed into a cement post over here.
You better leave on good terms because if it's the kind of firing where they got to call security's not going to let you make that pitch.
No, and I can't rip that out. No. You know, I don't have that kind of brute strength. So I
have no reason to call security.
Yeah,
so what we need then is like one of those ring timer buzzers that they have in gyms.
Yeah, exactly.
We
just
set it
when we hit 11 minutes.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that'll work out. Plenty to get to, so we'll hit the timer. Plenty to talk about here today, including PBC over the weekend, including the Mosley Mayorga pay-per-view. Yep. We'll talk about all of that. Yes. Later on, we'll get into Triple G and David Lemieux, and of course the action coming up this weekend. But we'll begin with this past weekend. Morgan, we got the bits and bites out, the Prince Igor vodka, and we had ourselves an old-fashioned fight party for the two fights that were happening at the same time. And at the same damn time, the fights ended as if it was all planned. Yeah, exactly.
Well, the one thing I noticed from the Mosley Mayorga fight was that they were taking a little bit longer than 60 seconds between rounds. Because if you remember, because Mares and Santa Cruz are about 5 or 6 rounds in when Mosley and Mayorga started. There's about a 30-second lag between rounds. We start. 30 seconds later, Mosley and Mayorga starts. And then as the rounds go on, the start times of the round get closer and closer and closer until you get to the 6th round, and they're starting at the same time. Now, if we have 1 minute between, that's standard everywhere, 1 minute between rounds, why is one fight gaining ground on the other fight?
Well, see, it is interesting. Now, I do know from working on boxing telecasts that the commission will allow, and I've been on broadcasts where they've allowed up to an extra 8 seconds. So you can play with that a little bit. On pay-per-view, though, there's no reason to because you don't have commercials to worry about. Right. If you're on ESPN, if you're on CBS or whatever, you do need that extra 8 seconds to get out of commercial, come back, maybe show a replay, then get back into the action. But if you're on pay-per-view, you don't have that to worry about.
So Mares and Santa Cruz would have needed the extra, say, 8 seconds because they had their broadcast had to deal with commercials.
Yes.
Mosley and Mayorga likely needed the extra 8 seconds because their combined age was close to 90.
Let's start with Santa Cruz and Mares. Let's start with the real fight of the weekend before we get into the.
I mean, the Mosley Mayorga fight was real.
It was a fight that took place. It happened. Real. So in that respect, it was somewhat shocking.
It was a very real fight.
Very good fight between Santa Cruz and Mares. I don't think that the 114 scorecard made a whole lot of sense. Santa Cruz really took that fight over, particularly in the second half after Mares just came out absolutely blazing early on. And you sort of got the impression early on, like, hey, wait, Santa Cruz has never had to back up in his career. What is he going to do? Eventually, he did figure that out. I do think that the fight of the year chatter surrounding this fight is maybe overstating the quality of this fight a little bit. I think we got about 4 or 5 fight of the year caliber rounds, and then it turned into what it turned out to be.
Right. It was an interesting fight. It was an exciting fight. It's worth watching again if you're
it is.
Boxing.
A lot of punches.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing.
A lot of punches.
And that's what I don't know that Mares was ready for. I think Mares knew one of them would slow down and drop the punch output as the fight went on. I think Mares just thought it would be Santa Cruz, and it turns out it wasn't Santa Cruz. Santa Cruz just kept throwing, and Mares slowed down. I don't know that Mares was ready for that. I don't know that he had a game, had a plan B or a plan C in case Santa Cruz was able to keep up that pace. Exciting fight of the year. Yeah, let's hold off on that just for now.
I don't know that Mares could have a plan B when you're a 5'4" guy against a guy who's as tall as Santa Cruz if he decides to back up and use that range.
Right.
But I don't think he ever anticipated that Santa Cruz could or would do that. So a guy at that size in this weight class at 122 and 126, what else is he going to do? I mean, his only choice was to go in there and try and be on top of his chest. And if for some reason he gets pushed off of the chest, he's in deep trouble.
He's in deep trouble. And we were talking before his fight about all this new muscle mass that Abner Mares had, muscle mass Mares. But again, if Santa Cruz makes a decision that he's going to use his arm length, well then, the muscle mass doesn't really mean much. You can't get in there and wrestle him. It's not Muay Thai. And again, as you said, the fight became what it became. And I don't know that Mares had other options unless, he starts doing what he did to Agbeko and hitting him below the belt and hoping the referee doesn't penalize him for it.
Hey, it worked that night. You and I sort of speculated leading into the fight, having watched some of the vignettes leading up to the fight. Mares revealed that he had been running twice a day in camp. He'd run in the morning, he'd do his workout sessions, he'd go to the boxing gym, then he'd run again and then work out, maybe to combat some of that muscle mass. And I guess my initial speculation is, A, is he focusing enough on his actual game plan to get this done? I don't think that really showed. I mean, he did, again, what we thought that he could.
Right.
And clearly it didn't tire him out either, because he still chucked 1,000 punches in this fight, or very close to it, so it didn't really have that much of an impact.
Well, is what we think.
Yeah.
But but between the two of them, Mares was the one that wore out down the stretch. But were we in his camp? We don't know. We don't know if he was overtrained. Only his coach, only Mares and his trainers, and his doctor know if he was overtrained. But running twice a day on top of your boxing, even for boxers, that's a lot. Timothy Bradley was probably watching that vignette saying, man, that guy's risking overtraining. So
runners would tell you, like Cam Levins, remember, eventually he had to say, you know what, I run for a living, but maybe you're running twice a day. Maybe I got to cut this out.
150 miles a week.
Yeah.
Cam Levins, exactly.
Yeah, Mares doesn't need, steeplechaser mileage, I would think. I think what's notable of this fight, and finally we get a fight that we've been asking for quite some time.
Yes.
And hey, look, surprise, Leo Santa Cruz wasn't afraid to get in there and fight someone. And this is why you can't throw that out when it comes to boxers, when it comes to professional prize fighters. No. Santa Cruz was never afraid of fighting Abner Mares or anyone else. If you want to put the blame on Santa Cruz's soft opposition, there are people in his camp that you can certainly hurl that blame at, but it has nothing to do with the guy who laces up the gloves.
These people, and I feel like the people tuning into this podcast kind of understand that, or they should. These people fight for a living. If you're scared to fight somebody, you get weeded out, long before you long before you get a professional belt, for the most part. And if you're going to blame Mares for having soft opposition, well, fighters don't always choose who they're going to fight. So if a guy's always fighting soft opposition, it's because his management is making it so.
For whatever reason.
Right, but when you're a Mares level fighter and you're on PBC, for as many bad fights as they got to put on, they also have to put on good fights to keep people watching. So at a certain point, no one's going to skate forever, and at a certain point, you're going to get matched up tough. Look at Adrian Broner, Al Heyman guy. A guy who's trying to position himself as the next Floyd Mayweather, but he hasn't been matched up soft.
Not recently, at least. Certainly on his way up, he had his
right, but in a long time, he hasn't been matched up soft. And again, he takes the fights. He doesn't have a choice. And again, as much as people criticize Heyman, criticize PBC, at a certain point, you have all these fighters. You have 200 fighters under contract. They can't all be easy fights for the fighters you want to showcase. At a certain point, you got to put on competitive fights, and this is what we had.
And actually, my broadcast colleague, Paulie Malignaggi, had a discussion about this on his podcast the other week. And, this isn't like rah-rah America stuff, but he did make the point that if you are a fighter who is based in the United States and eventually you bring your career here, eventually you have to take that step up.
Yes.
There are places in this world where boxers can skate by and can get a world title and still get to handpick all of their fights and ride it out into retirement. The United States is not that place. It just doesn't happen. You can't find an example of anyone that happened to.
Well, right. Well, because if we're in, not to pick on Germany, but if we're in Germany, you can do that. It's because you're the German guy beating all the foreign guys, and you can, handpick the guys you want to beat. Whereas in the United States, you don't have a built-in audience just because you're the American fighting the non-Americans.
You have just the audience that's there, and it's the same audience that watches every single boxing telecast. It doesn't grow that much.
Well, right. So, and again, eventually the market is going to demand, no matter who you are, whether you're Mayweather, Berto, Mares, Santa Cruz, eventually the market, your fan base demands that, you fight somebody of your caliber. And again, this idea that guys at this level can skate forever because they're afraid to be tested, that only goes but so far. and this is what we saw Saturday.
Well, when we come back, we'll talk about a fight that the fans demanded, that we wanted for many, many years. The long-awaited rematch between Shane Mosley and Ricardo Mayorga.
Yes.
What a amusing and sad spectacle all at the same time.
At the same time.
We'll break it down from top to bottom when we come back on Fight Network Boxing Weekly. Welcome back to Fight Network Boxing Weekly. Corey Erdman alongside Morgan Campbell. Now, in the first segment, we talked about the real fight of the weekend, Leo Santa Cruz and Abner Mares. But at the same time, in the same city, Shane Mosley and Ricardo Mayorga fought for a second time with the same outcome. Mosley stopping Ricardo Mayorga in the last second of the 6th round on a body shot. Now, we watched this pay-per-view from top to bottom, live.
Yes.
Someone is going to pay $50 for it, whether it's me out of my own pocket or whether I get to expense this puppy. $50 was spent. You're welcome, Shane and Ricardo. I don't know how many others managed to do this or how many others found a way to illegally stream Box Nation, whatever. People watch this somehow. Before we even get to the fight,
yes,
the musical performances on this pay-per-view were the absolute best. The absolute best.
What was... I
have to find her name.
The first performer.
But it was
the blonde.
Yes, and it was her
body rolls.
And it was her song that was the theme song for the entire event, and they just kept playing it over and over and over.
Her name was...
I'm gonna find it if I go back in my timeline.
Mandy Rain.
Mandy Rain. Okay,
Mandy Rain.
So Mandy Rain, who all day long, by the way, was defending her artistic integrity against people who heard how bad her sound check was.
She was on Twitter throwing the entire rest of the music world under the bus.
Yeah.
At least I'm not like these other people who get out here and lip sync.
Yes.
And then what did she do when it came time to perform? She lip synced.
And when she didn't, should have lip synced.
Well, right. When she came out with like the Tupac Heavy D stacked vocals.
Right.
So when she wanted to sing,
Yeah.
So she's singing over the vocal track. So when she sings, she sings. When she doesn't feel like singing, there's still vocals.
Something's coming through.
Yes.
Who was the other group that performed then? Because
there was a trio of Michael Jackson impersonators.
Yeah, those guys.
Is there a place where we could like post these links? Kind of
absolutely. And I think when we post this, we'll get some footage to layer over top of this as well.
Yes.
But for the audio listeners, you're going to have to go and look these things up. I highly suggest watching this broadcast from top to bottom.
This group was called.
Yep.
Acnu?
Yes, Acnu.
Acnu.
Yeah.
They look like Michael Jackson.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And their performance was long. It was almost as long as the fight, which I didn't...
Maybe to make up some time between the main events to keep that conspiracy theory going?
Maybe.
Yeah.
But I just don't know where Shane Mosley... Because it's his show, right?
Yes.
So I don't know where he found 3 Michael Jackson impersonators in one band. And I'm sure talking them into performing on the pay-per-view wasn't hard, because I don't know how many gigs, when you're acting, I don't know how many gigs you have. You're probably not busy.
Certainly not pay-per-view gigs.
Well, exactly. So come
Looks
on
great
down.
on LinkedIn, by the way. Performed live on pay-per-view.
I just don't know what they were supposed to add to the broadcast. It's like they took all the worst elements of the Rock Nation shows.
Yes.
Like at least when Fabulous was rapping Bobby Shmurda doing hip-hop karaoke.
Yeah. You're like, I know this song.
At least I'd heard of Fabulous.
Right.
At least I heard of Bobby Shmurda. Mandy Rain.
Acnu.
Well, again, the most amazing... the most amazing detail about Mandy Rain is that when we audited her Twitter account, her 250 plus thousand followers, 93% of them are actually real people.
Yes.
Because I just knew that she would have bought more than half of those followers, but no. Well, that was the most amazing
somewhere in her Twitter description, I believe it said part-time Victoria's Secret model, whether that's true or not. But I think anyone sees that and they're like, well, I better click follow here because maybe the goods are going to come through my timeline eventually. So I think that's just how it worked out. I did love her Wikipedia page, which is so obviously just written by herself. It's just written by her.
It is the most detailed Wikipedia page you'll ever see for a musician that hasn't released an album.
Yes.
Like maybe Jay Electronica. I don't think he doesn't have
Bobby
an album
Shmurda.
yet. Right. But at least people have heard of them.
Yes, he's had a radio single.
Yes, these Mandy Rain.
And it's all about like things that she auditioned for that she didn't get.
Yes.
Too. Like, wow, she once auditioned for a show on Nickelodeon. Another person was chosen. But then she bounced back. I don't know. It was exactly what I thought the pay-per-view would be, though.
Well, yeah. Well, the pay-per-view, you get the performers you deserve, in a way.
Yes.
So when Mosley fought Mayweather came to the ring with the OJs. Because they sang For the Love of Money.
And then Tank.
Tank
did the national anthem.
We got to get Tank on this show.
Yeah, we do have to get Tank on this show.
Tank, if you're listening, we're getting you on this show. But you got the performers that the pay-per-view deserved.
Yeah.
Is what happened.
And in the main event, I guess you got the performers that the pay-per-view deserved as well. Listen, the fight was as one-sided and as farcical as we thought it would be.
Farcical is the word.
I guess the question is, was it in any way humorous, or did it become sad for you? Because as soon as the camera pans to Mayorga's family and his wife weeping while holding one of their children, and then all of his other children are sitting there with him, it really took a very somber tone that I don't think that the announcers didn't go with that tone at all.
No, well, to me the sad part was before that. It's just
the fight happened.
The fact that the fight happened, the fact that we know Shane Mosley spent his own money to stage this, the fact that Shane Mosley was in court trying to win this court injunction against Don King, testifying that he thinks this fight is going to do 1.4 million pay-per-view buys. And then you put yourself in Shane Mosley's shoes and you picture him thinking about his biggest pay-per-view fights. Oh, I did however many million against De La Hoya. I did 1.5 million against Mayweather and another 1.5 million against Pacquiao. And in his mind, he's the common denominator.
Correct.
He thinks he's the one selling all these pay-per-views. It doesn't occur to him that he's just the guy fighting whoever the biggest pay-per-view seller in boxing is at the time.
No, he certainly propped those numbers up, let's be fair, but
yes.
It was not him that sold a million.
Yes.
Shane Mosley versus Fighter X doesn't sell a million even when he was Shane Mosley.
Now, this guy if he's in the boxing business, you would think he would follow the numbers. He's sat here and watched Mayweather fight Maidana twice in total 1.8 million pay-per-views over 2 fights against one guy. Somehow Mosley gets into his head. So the sad part is him really thinking he's going to get 1.4 million pay-per-view buys at $50 a pop, whatever it is. That's the sad part. And then when you think about the fact that he rented this arena, and then when they show shots of the arena, it's very obvious that there's nobody sitting beyond the first 10, 15 rows of seats. And then you can hear individual cheers. You can hear them echo. And you just wonder how much money he spent on this. How much money he lost on this. Is anyone else even going to get paid?
Yeah.
Because
does he take anything home?
Well, it reminds me of, remember when Murad Mohammed would do shows, and then like he would go from town to town, put on a show, no one would get paid. He would go to the next town, and there'd just be this trail of lawsuits following Murad Mohammed from town to town because he wasn't paying people.
And then you declare bankruptcy and vanish.
Right. Yeah. So, and I just don't. So afterwards, Mosley says, "Oh yeah, well I want to avenge all my losses." He has 9 losses, 2 of them to a guy that's dead, so he can't avenge those 2 losses. Other losses to guys who are retired or old, or Mosley's fighting at 160. How's he going to avenge his loss to Pacquiao? And you think about the fact that every time he fights, he's putting on the fight. He's spending money. He's probably losing money, and for him, I feel bad. It's sad because he's just digging himself deeper into debt, and there's really no way out unless he declares bankruptcy.
What was sad to me, on top of the fight itself...
we don't know that he's in debt right now. We just know that he's...
Yes.
We can reasonably conclude...
that his net worth has gone down after Saturday, yes.
He didn't make money on Saturday.
Yes. I'll tell you what made me sad, and it was the build-up to this fight and how people... in the media just sort of took this as at face value, the boxing media as well. And the boxing media that has very recently been outraged about a whole lot of things, but found no reason to be outraged about 2 guys and perhaps a woman who probably staged a sexual assault for the purposes of selling a pay-per-view.
Yes.
Found no reason to be outraged about a guy in Ricardo Mayorga giving their money to him for this pay-per-view, a guy who has Daniel Ortega on his trunks. And the reason that he has Daniel Ortega on his trunks, by the way, The reason that Ricardo Mayorga is in dire financial straits is because a portion, and nobody talks about this, but a portion of his purses every single time go to Daniel Ortega because for somehow, when Ricardo Mayorga was charged with raping an underage girl in Nicaragua, Daniel Ortega made that go away.
This disappear. And you know what's funny?
You know what? Like, no one says a word about any of these things.
Yes, and it's funny. And I think it's still this way. I don't know to what extent Cuba is an open market for athletes, but every time a baseball player would come from Cuba, they'd have to establish residency in a third country, and then the Office of Foreign Assets Control would have to assess this person to make sure that they weren't going to send money, take their major league salary, and then send it to a hostile government.
Right.
Daniel Ortega's never gotten along with the United States. Yet somehow...
How does this work?
Mayorga's able to take this money back to Nicaragua, give it to this leftist leader who, again, has never gotten along with the United States, and it's not a problem, which is strange. And you would, and part of it has to do with the profile of the event. So if Mayorga, I don't know, if Mayorga's fighting Pacquiao, if Mayorga's fighting Mayweather, you'd hear about it. Oh no, if he was fighting Mayweather, you probably
wouldn't hear about it. No, because he'd just be the clown, like, look at him blow smoke in Floyd's face.
And he'd be the guy. Wait till he fights a real man who can take his punch.
Yeah,
right. But this whole Daniel Ortega thing is intriguing. Remember, Alexis Arguello won that fight, and then someone came into the ring and put with a Sandinista flag.
Yeah, right.
Put the baseball hat on him, and he's like, "Hey, what is this?"
Yeah, this is not. Yeah,
right. So part of it is Mayorga, regardless of whether or not Ortega made this charge go away, which apparently he did.
Again, we no clue, just so we don't get any lawsuits, but that agreement came upon around the time that Ricardo Mayorga was charged with raping an underage girl.
Yes.
And then that charge went away.
Charge goes away.
You can connect the dots however you want. That is the sequence of events.
Exactly. But, Mayorga might be loyal to Ortega anyway. But again, in the United States, to have an athlete, a public figure that's that loyal to somebody who's that far left and an outspoken opponent of the United States, you would think the hot take artists would line up, to take a kick at this guy. Nothing. In a lot of boxing media, there are some pretty conservative people, right? And you would think nothing.
No. There's some pretty good hot take artists out there as well, and we'll get to one of those a little bit later on in the program. You better hit a break, though. We'll be back with more on the other side of it here on Fight Network Boxing Weekly. Welcome back to Fight Network Boxing Weekly. Corey Erdman alongside Morgan Campbell. Now, before the break, we alluded to some really hot takes in the world of boxing. And boy, did Ron Borges come out with a real hot take.
Scorching.
I thought, ooh, man, just touch this page.
Don't, man. You're going to set this thing on fire.
We have water. I have water here. I thought that everyone agreed that Triple G versus David Lemieux was just a fun fight.
Yes.
We're just having some fun. Boxing's a good time, man. Right. We're all going to watch this fight. We all, I think, that Triple G is going to win, but no one really took this all that seriously.
Except
Ron Borges. I'm just going to pick out some lines here, but David Lemieux, a pushover, is the title of this article.
The headline is it's Deadspin-esque.
Yes.
When they just tell you, Dabo Swinney is the worst.
Yes,
boom.
Exactly.
Right here, so David Lemieux pushover. So just in case you're wondering what the story's going to be about, right?
So the second paragraph, the latest allegedly most avoided fighter in boxing, in quotations.
The most avoided fighter in boxing.
Is WBA, WBC middleweight champion Gennady Golovkin. That, at least, is the excuse being used to justify putting him on an HBO pay-per-view nothing title defense against a journeyman Canadian opponent named David Lemieux, October 17th at Madison Square Garden. First of all, I love the quotations, as you pointed out when we were talking about this beforehand. But also, calling David Lemieux a journeyman opponent is just, it just shows how disconnected you are from the current sport. Just using that verbiage to describe David Lemieux. Hector Munoz is a journeyman opponent. The guy that Alfredo Angulo beat up on the undercard of PBC, that is a journeyman opponent. And you could say, yeah, these are semantics. You can call people whatever. But no, like you're doing this to create an effect here. And you're lying to people about what David Lemieux is. He's not a journeyman opponent. And he's a legitimate contender.
Well, the hallmark of the hot take is that you present your point of view and it's really extreme. And whatever disagrees with you has to necessarily is the other extreme, and there's nothing in the middle.
Right.
So what Borges says here is that this fight's a farce and Lemieux's a pushover, and it doesn't belong on pay-per-view. Now, to say this fight doesn't belong on pay-per-view, you can make a strong case. Triple G's never been on pay-per-view before. You would hope that for his sake, that his first pay-per-view fight is against a higher profile opponent. Than Lemieux, just to ensure sales. So would I have preferred to see this fight on regular HBO? Of course. Does that mean that Triple G is necessarily not an avoided fighter or a feared fighter? No. Does that mean that Lemieux is a pushover? No. And you don't have to diminish Lemieux to make the point that this fight probably shouldn't be on pay-per-view. But this is what a hot take artist does.
Yes.
This is what makes the take hot. Just like using quotation marks around words like risk and streak and punching power.
Also, like, maybe it's on pay-per-view because they're going to make money off of it.
Maybe. Well, this is...
Or because, also this is a business, right? So at some point you have to say to people, Triple G is pay-per-view worthy.
He's premium, yes.
Right.
And that's kind of how you create the
It's perception. Like Canelo, they had to do the same thing. That's just how these things work.
Right. And this is, the difference with Triple G, but it might work out for Triple G. Because, you do have to...
experiment.
You do have to, one, you're going to see how much he can sell and how willing people are to part with money as well as time to see him. Two, you kind of have, it's like any other business, trying to transition from free to paid or the other way around. You kind of have to, if you want people to pay to see Triple G, you have to train them to pay to see Triple G. Just like people are trained to see Mayweather, Pacquiao, Cotto, etc. You don't just put them on free. If this is what you're trying to do with them, then as you said, at a certain point, you have to make that leap. Now, is this as big a pay-per-view spectacle as Cotto Canelo is going to be? No, it's not.
Nope.
Doesn't mean it's a worthless fight. And again, it doesn't mean that Lemieux is strictly a journeyman. He's not a tomato can. Is his resume as accomplished as Triple G's? No, it's not. But that's what this fight is. You get a guy that's credible, has a very good record, has knocked some people out, but is clearly, on paper, a couple steps below the guy you're trying to showcase. This happens in boxing all the time.
Well, and honestly, if you follow boxing and know what's going on, who would you prefer him fight right now that is available and that is on the correct side of this promotional and television divide?
Right.
Who else is there?
I don't know. Well,
you can toss names out there and say, like, well, if you're a real fighter, you can go ahead and do all these. But, none of that is reasonable.
Even in the lead, I think of Evander Holyfield taking short money to fight Mike Tyson. Okay, well, great. Triple G isn't Holyfield. Lemieux isn't Tyson.
Yeah.
So what are we talking about?
Well, everyone should take short money just to be brave at their job right now.
Well, right.
They'll take a pay cut.
Right. And it's funny how... Yeah, we in the media are always telling fighters to take short money. Would I take short money?
Yeah.
No.
Never.
No.
No.
Now, the media landscape has changed and a lot more people write for free or do broadcast stuff for free now than
Become
before.
brand architects. That's the way out.
This is work for in-kind perks. But at the same time, are you really taking a pay cut? This person telling a fighter to fight for short money against a dangerous opponent? Are you going on the most... dangerous and time-intensive and effort-intensive assignment of your career for less money? No, you're not.
No.
So let's stop.
And also, to scoff at David Lemieux and then, just later on, sort of in the throw-ins at the end of the article, to just mention some names of some European fighters that Lou DiBella has signed, without ever calling them, guys that beat up on stiffs and journeymen and whatnot. Like, why is this? Yeah, why does this article exist?
Yenifel Vicente from the Dominican Republic, because we all know that there's never been a fixed fight,
never,
or a mismatch in the Dominican Republic.
Also, Terrence Crawford versus Thierry Jean. That's basically the same fight as this. From the same guy, is two guys from the same camp beating the consensus best facing the consensus best in the division.
Yes.
Nothing wrong with that.
Maybe as that fight approaches, Thierry Jean is a pushover.
Yes.
Maybe as it approaches.
That might be it.
But and again, it's the hallmark, too, of the person that doesn't pay that much attention to boxing when the first thing they compare a current fight to is something that happened 20 years
1992.
ago. Yeah. Yes. I mean, that's how I am with hip-hop, because I kind of stopped listening to hip-hop around 2002-ish, something like that.
Or wrestling.
Yeah, so when someone talks to me about hip-hop, I'm like, yeah, man, that's like the time when the Artifacts did that song with Mad Skills. That's kind of my hip-hop frame of reference, right? Boxing, I try to stay current.
Well, speaking of that era...
Lip service and breath control.
Yes.
Artifacts in the House of the Dynamite Soul.
Speaking of that era, and guys who were relevant during that era, coming up after the break, we're going to talk about this hot September 5th card in Hollywood, Florida.
Yes.
Shannon Briggs returns,
yes.
And there are about 100 old heavyweights in the crowd as well.
Yes.
And we'll talk about some real boxing as well. PBC is back on CBS. We'll preview that when we come back on Fight Network Boxing Week. Welcome back to Fight Network Boxing Weekly, the final segment here. Corey Erdman and Morgan Campbell. Morgan, huge weekend in boxing that has to kick off in Hollywood, Florida, with Shannon the Cannon Briggs fighting again for like the 100th time this year. This weekend, he's going to be taking on Mike Marone on a card featuring exclusively heavyweights.
Yes.
And a card where in the crowd will be, 30 former heavyweight champions? Like anyone who's ever held a piece of the heavyweight title is going to be there watching as well, including Vitaly Klitschko. How are they paying for all these people to be there?
I don't know. First of all, I don't know when promoters are going to give up on the idea that heavyweights are inherently interesting. Like that's a myth, and I don't know why it still hangs on. And you can tell, like, when a sports announcer doesn't watch boxing, when a game is really exciting and the sports announcer says, man, this is like a heavyweight fight. I'm like, no, it's not, because heavyweight fights are boring. They're two big guys. Very rarely
go to the Seminole Hard Rock.
Are heavyweight fights actually exciting?
That's right.
Heavyweight fights are slow and plodding and a lot full of hugging. Right?
Are you telling me that Maurice Harris versus Grover Young is not going to be an exciting fight?
Speaking of exciting heavyweight fights, and here we go, referencing old stuff. Mm-hmm. For you guys that are like into, if you're the type to get into YouTube rabbit holes, which many of us are, Maurice Harris versus Derek Jefferson.
Oh yeah.
From like 99, 2000-ish, around that era. Derek Jefferson from Detroit used to wear, remember, he didn't have a robe, he had like a high school football jersey he used to wear to the ring. That was an insanely exciting fight. And I remember...
Best Larry Merchant call ever, too.
Yeah, and remember, like, Maurice Harris, he was a guy, he was maybe like 24 at the time, but he turned pro at 17.
Yeah.
He had all these brothers and sisters to support. And you watched the fight and you thought to yourself, if this guy ever had, like, proper training, he'd probably be really good. But he never managed to turn it into anything. But if you want to see exciting heavyweight fights, as opposed to what is likely to happen in Hollywood, Florida, if you want to see exciting heavyweight fights, do yourself a favor. Go to YouTube, try to find Maurice Harris versus Derek Jefferson.
And one of the scariest knockouts ever.
Yes.
Sorry to spoil it for you, but yeah. Scariest knockouts ever, best Larry Merchant call ever.
Yes.
You need to go and watch this.
Yes, indeed.
I don't think he's going to stop my man Grover Young in this fight, all right? Who are you to doubt Grover Young, the guy who has a technical draw with Sergey Kovalev,
Does he really?
went the distance with super middleweight champion Badu Jack? You just look at this guy's resume.
Well, then
you cannot stop Grover Young.
How is he fighting as a heavyweight?
Well, Grover Young has found his way up to the heavyweight ranks, but that's because he can't find anyone to hurt him at light heavyweight.
He
has to challenge himself.
The most feared fighter.
That's right.
Oh no! Looking at this picture of Grover Young, I can see how he's
look at his resume though. Look at the guys that can't stop him.
Yeah,
he's the most durable fighter in the world.
Yes, he is. And the other cameo on this card is Quatrain Hill.
Yes,
who was a former running back at the University of Miami.
Yeah.
And he was one of the people, remember when they had the Heavyweight Factory?
Yeah, he was on the cover of ESPN the magazine, remember?
Yes,
Yeah.
the Heavyweight Factory, and I think John David Jackson was coaching there. And that was somebody's idea, was to get all these former football players and teach them how to box.
Then he got knocked out in the second fight.
With the hope that one of these guys would turn into some heavyweight champion. And again, as much as heavyweight boxing doesn't demand the same extreme level of skill as, say, flyweight or bantamweight boxing does, when you take a guy that only started boxing at 22, has never really been in a fight before, he's always going to be at a disadvantage against the guys who have been fighting this whole time. And to a certain extent, it doesn't matter that the guy's a great athlete, because being a great athlete doesn't necessarily determine whether or not you can take a punch right on the chin.
Well, that's why, like, even what Seth Mitchell did, it's actually pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
Or like what Dominic Breazeale's doing. Like, he only had like 37 amateur fights, won an Olympic, like was on the Olympic team.
Yes.
And, this is just like a quarterback from Colorado.
And I don't think the casual fans or even some trainers understand the extent to which those guys are outliers and not really representative of what you can do when you just show up and start boxing at 24 because your football career is over. Especially Seth Mitchell, because it's not like he was a healthy guy who started. He had knee injuries, so it's not like it's 100% Seth Mitchell. This is like 90% Seth Mitchell because his knee is too screwed up to play football, so he goes into boxing. But it's not like a trick knee isn't going to affect you in boxing too, because it is. And if you don't believe me, you can ask Sergio Martinez. If you have a bad knee, it's going to affect you.
Miguel Cotto thanks that knee every single day of his life. All right, real boxing happening this weekend.
Yes.
PBC returns to CBS, a broadcast that I'm going to be on. Headlined by Anthony Durrell versus Marco Antonio Rubio. Probably the more competitive and compelling fight on that card is Tomoki Kameda taking on Jamie McDonnell in the rematch. I believe you and I watched the first fight together.
Yep.
In doing the research for this fight, talking a little bit with Jamie McDonnell, one of the best anecdotes that I received, we're talking to him about the sport. He's like, listen, man, I don't even like boxing. I don't enjoy boxing. I enjoy plastering better. He has a plastering business.
Good for him.
And he much would prefer to plaster for a living, but he wants to box until he can pay off his house and then just shut it down and go back to plastering. This infuriates some people, though. This infuriates some people who think he doesn't love the sport enough and he's not committed and whatnot because he's just doing what he's good at. I find this hilarious.
It's honest and it's authentic. And when you said that, the first thing I thought is, I bet you some people are furious with this man for having the nerve to have an exit plan, to get out of boxing.
Watch Twitter when this comes up on Sunday's broadcast, by the way. Let's just see what people's reaction is. Plastering? No wonder.
Well, one.
He should go help out Antonio Margarito, you know what I
mean? He probably, how much free advertising, if he's smart, he'll put like his
own company,
his website on his trunks. Yeah, and promote his company, promote the heck out of his company. Why not? Two, I don't understand, and we talked about this last week too, what it is with boxing fans and boxing media. Our obsession with seeing people take unnecessary risk, ignoring the fact that your decision to do this sport for a living is a huge risk. Our obsession with seeing people on the one hand, hey kids, be well-rounded. If you're going to be a pro athlete, everyone thinks they're going to be a pro athlete. Make sure you have a fallback plan B, because it might not work out. So for McDonnell, plan A has worked out, but he still says, I prefer plan B because I enjoy it and I don't get beat up.
Plan B is going to be there a heck of a lot longer.
And what do? We rip him.
I think that's...
We rip his You're not dedicated to this. Well, he's dedicated enough. He's a world champion. He beat an undefeated fighter in his first fight in the U.S.
But that mentality...
He's plenty dedicated.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and that mentality is uniform across all sports, though. We see it in football, too. We love the hardworking guy who just, doesn't matter how talented he is. We want guys to be grinding it out and injuring themselves in practice.
Yes. And
at whatever expense.
And then when a guy retires young, like these two guys from the 49ers did this year, then we start talking. Then we make it a values thing. What, are you not man enough to keep playing? Not man enough to keep playing football? Where's your backbone, son? Are you not a red-blooded American? Well, maybe he just wants his brain cells, right?
Well,
and there was an essay in the New York Times, about the marginal value of money, and this is why guys are able to, because they're not any different from the rich CEO who quits his job, because we look at it and say, you're making $1 million a year. Why would you quit? He's looking at it and says, wait a minute, I already have $10 million in the bank. Another $1 million isn't the same to me as it is to you because you have nothing.
Right.
So I can walk away from $1 million because I already have $10 million.
And another $1 million, it comes at the medical expense of $? Million.
Right.
Could be more than I currently have. Yeah.
Right. So McDonald's says, let me take these paydays, pay off my house, build up my business, and at his level, he's not making millions.
No.
Right. So it is a little bit easier to walk away because it's not like. He's getting beat up for $10 million. He's getting beat up for what, 80 grand?
Yeah.
100 grand. Okay, boom. Pay off the house and make 80 grand, 100 grand a year plastering people. You know why? Because you have the best known plastering business in all of England because you got free advertising on PBC. And he's lucky he's not in the UFC because Dana White would come in and say, how dare you advertise your own plastering business on your own shorts.
Take this Reebok hoodie, Mr. McDonald.
Take the Reebok hoodie.
Yeah, and,
exactly.
Speaking of UFC ties, by the way,
yes.
Stitch Duran will be in Kameda's corner as well.
Good
Getting
for him.
plenty of boxing work
Yes.
now that he left UFC. I mentioned also Anthony Durrell is going to be on that card, taking on Marco Antonio Rubio, who's moving up to super middleweight. Marco Antonio Rubio, the oldest looking 35-year-old boxer in the history of the sport. He'll never. Well, he said he had walked away from the sport, but then he just wandered into the Romanza gym, found Nacho Beristain, and now is finding himself in another payday. Honestly, he's been stopped in spectacular fashion at lower weights before. He's basically been a career middleweight, at least for the last 8 years. I really don't know how he's going to fare against Anthony Durrell, who granted did not look good against Badu Jack either, but he's just so much bigger.
We're at the point now where I'm worried about Rubio's health. Nacho Beristain, you should. I don't know if you should let one fight define how you think of a trainer in perpetuity, but I just remember Nacho Beristain being the guy who thought it was a good idea for Oscar De La Hoya to try to become faster than Manny Pacquiao in this fight. Said to Oscar De La Hoya, let's dry out to 145 pounds because you got to be fast against this fast guy. Even though no matter how fast Oscar De La Hoya gets, he's never going to be faster than the fast guy.
He'd be lighter.
Right. So he just came into the ring drained and slow, and then Pacquiao manhandled him. And this is...
That said, he did get the strategy against Pacquiao correct. Very correct later on in his career.
Yes.
So we can give him a pass.
That is true. But this is what I think of. This is Beristain, an older fighter. So I don't... I'm at the point, again, where I'm just starting to worry about Rubio. And I don't know... if this chance meeting with Nacho Beristain is the best thing for Rubio's long-term health.
Well, maybe he'll get lucky, and Anthony the Dog Durrell will take a little bit of a night off and just cruise through the round. So we basically have to wrap up here, but I can't end the show without letting you plug your blog post about Anthony Durrell against Dante Craig, which really needs to be read by everyone. Speaking of farcical fights, Anthony Durrell versus Dante Craig in Flint, Michigan is something that everyone needs to relive.
That was the summer of 2011. Yes. We will post the link somewhere. It's on.
Yeah.
If you go to buymorgancampbell.com, which I think is my blog, it's been a while since I've updated it.
We'll tweet it out.
But we will tweet it out because that was... all the stuff going on around the fight was at least as entertaining as the fight itself. The dog versus the Inferno.
All right. Well, that is all the time we have for this week's program. Morgan, thank you so much once again. Up next on the radio side, MMA Meltdown Radio with Gabriel Morency is up next. But for everyone at home watching this, thank you guys for tuning in.
Ding, ding, ding.